The wind came off the ridgeline in long, dry gusts, picking at the canvas shades above the flight line and flaring the edges of crew jackets. Sunlight had just crested over the hangar roofs, sharp and low, throwing long shadows across the tarmac where the aircraft sat, lined and gleaming. Greystone Air Station was awake, alert, and operating under a kind of practiced urgency that said everything important was about to happen. Rachel moved through it with quiet precision. Her flight gloves were looped through her belt. Her name badge was clipped squarely above her left pocket. She held her helmet under one arm and a mission tablet under the other. Several crew members nodded to her as she passed, and one offered a quiet "morning, ma'am" before returning to a diagnostics panel. There was respect in the way they moved around her. That kind of regard wasn't given easily on a base like this, and Rachel hadn't expected it to last. Captain Thomas caught up with her just past the nose of their assigned aircraft. He adjusted his comms unit and glanced up at the cloudless sky. Weather's holding. Target zone looks stable for another 12 hours. He kept his voice light, though his eyes moved quickly. You still think we'll hit the secondary ingress point? If the signal shielding holds, Rachel replied. But I want you running passive confirmation on the ridge sensors anyway. Anything pings above 100.0. You tell me. Thomas nodded. Got it. They were 20 steps from the Falcon V9 when everything shifted. It wasn't loud or sudden. It didn't need to be. Ground crew turned subtly away, finding new reasons to inspect gear or rebalance crates. A low murmur traveled across the staging area like pressure before a storm. Rachel stopped mid-stride as she spotted General Rain approaching from the tower access path. He walked alone. No aides, no preamble. Thomas hesitated. Something's wrong. Continue pre-flight, Rachel said, handing him the tablet. I'll be right back. She intercepted the general before he reached the aircraft. They stopped at regulation distance. Her posture was correct, her expression unreadable. General, she said. Rain's face was drawn tight, the corners of his mouth sharp. Step aside. Rachel, we need to speak privately. They moved off the flight line, stopping near the refueling cart where no one could hear them over the idle hum. Rain didn't waste time. You're off the roster. Rachel's stance didn't shift. May I ask for clarification, sir? My assessment is that your presence on this sortie no longer aligns with the operational framework. With respect, General, I built the framework. That was under review, and now it's been updated. He extended his hand. Mission tablet, please. She handed it to him without comment. The gesture was smooth, almost routine. He didn't look her in the eye as he took it. Captain Rafi will lead your team. You're reassigned pending post-mission review. Yes, sir. For a moment, Rain seemed to wait for something defiance, protest, a raised voice, but Rachel simply held his gaze. She gave him no satisfaction. He nodded once, then turned and walked away, the tablet clutched in one hand like the matter was settled. Rachel stood still for a full second. Then she turned, walked back to the operations corridor, and disappeared inside the hangar complex without looking over her shoulder. In the women's locker room, she moved mechanically. She unzipped her flight vest, folded her outer layer, and placed each item in her kit bag with methodical care. Her helmet went into the bottom with the foam cradle aligned. Her gloves were tucked into their designated slot. Her name tag remained clipped to her uniform. She opened her locker to place the bag inside and paused. The photograph was still there. 5 people, standing shoulder to shoulder in a dirt compound overseas. 3 of the faces were blacked out with heavy marker. One man remained visible, smiling, hand resting casually on the back of a folding chair. The last figure in the frame was Rachel herself. Though the insignia on her uniform had long since changed, the silver eagle was gone now. So was the title that had once accompanied it. She stared at the photo without moving. Funny thing about erasures, came a voice behind her. Rachel turned. Colonel Mira stood at the door, arms crossed. Her face was unreadable, but her voice carried a quiet undertow. You plan a mission for 3 weeks. Write the vectors, build the timing, and the night before execution they tell you it's alignment issues. Mira shook her head. This isn't about readiness. Rachel closed the locker gently. It doesn't matter. The decision's been made. You know what it is. Mira's tone didn't accuse, it acknowledged. It's the protocol. It always was. Rachel didn't respond. Mira took a step forward. You ever think it wasn't worth it? Rachel looked at her. Every day. She zipped the bag closed and shouldered it. Mira didn't stop her. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. The flight line was active again. Crates were being loaded. Flight paths confirmed. Pilots gathered near the briefing tent as tactical displays blinked to life on portable consoles. Rachel walked parallel to the hangar, her boots steady on the gravel edge. No one looked her way. That was how it worked. Once you were off the list, you weren't part of the machinery. You were an unused part. You faded. You folded back into the landscape. At the far end of the tarmac, a Falcon V9 glinted under the sunlight. Ground crew buzzed around it, prepping it for launch. It was her jet. At least it had been, up until 20 minutes ago. She didn't stop. She didn't watch them work. Across the base, a portable radar unit rotated slowly, its dish making a full sweep against the horizon. Rachel's eyes tracked the arc out of habit. Her fingers, still resting on the strap of her bag, tapped once, then stopped. Somewhere deep in her mind, a number aligned with a shape, a signature, a phantom. But not yet. There would be time for that later. For now, she walked on, unseen, uninvited, but not unknowing. Never that. Rachel walked the long perimeter route behind the maintenance sheds, the duffel on her shoulder growing heavier with each step, though she made no effort to shift its weight. It was early enough that the sun still slanted between the structures, lighting the gravel with a soft, amber glow. From here, she could see the edge of the radar tower at the north boundary. The dish rotated slowly, mechanical and steady until it didn't. She stopped. The antenna's sweep had paused for less than half a second, just enough to be noticeable to anyone watching it with trained eyes. When it resumed, its motion realigned half a degree off its original path. It was the kind of error that wouldn't flag most diagnostics. But to Rachel, it wasn't an error. It was a signal bleed, just enough disruption to indicate a reflection where no surface should exist. She narrowed her eyes, then turned her head as if considering the angle of the sun. To anyone watching, the gesture would look idle, disinterested, even. But inside, her mind was already calculating distances and elevation, cross-referencing terrain models she'd memorized weeks ago. The radar dish wasn't glitching. It was responding to a false echo. Rachel continued walking. Her fingers slid into her pocket and closed around the portable SatLink device she kept on a side channel. It was an older model, matte black, slightly scratched, and not issued by the base. She tapped the screen 3 times and waited. The uplink took 6 seconds to process. Then the terminal pulsed once and displayed a line of text in narrow green lettering. Glass echo anomaly detected. High clearance override recommended. She stood very still. It was not the first time she had seen that message, but it was the first time in 5 years that it had come from a live source. Glass Echo had been designed as a defensive encryption shell, a way to hide sensitive signal operations beneath a layer of misdirection. It worked by mimicking environmental echoes and disguising transmission as atmospheric noise. Rachel had helped write the first version of the overlay. She had also built the emergency bypass key, the only thing capable of verifying true signal from false mirror. But Glass Echo had been decommissioned. Officially, anyway. She tapped the screen again and began scanning for the source. The false echo was faint, too faint for automatic systems, but it repeated on a 32-second interval. That alone confirmed it wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It was targeted. Someone had lifted a dormant shell of Glass Echo and was using it to project a mirage corridor over the northern range. Rachel's throat was dry. She adjusted the strap of her bag and walked faster. As she moved past the main comms tent, she could hear voices inside. Flight officers reviewing vector tables, loadmasters confirming refuel priorities. Her name did not come up. Of course it didn't. She crossed behind the generator block and angled toward the mission briefing building. Through the tinted windows, she could see the large display screen already active. Tactical overlays blinked across it. Captain Raffi stood near the center console, gesturing toward a series of ingress routes. Rachel stopped just short of the door. She wasn't authorized to enter anymore. Her credentials had been disabled when she was removed from the flight list that morning. If she opened the door, an alert would trigger. If she tried to speak without clearance, she would be flagged for insubordination. The corridor they were discussing was wrong. The projected safe route aligned directly over the false echo. The squadron would fly in thinking they were shielded by terrain, but the terrain was fabricated, a signal shadow, based on the old glass echo projection maps. The original shell had been fragmented, distorted, but whoever had mimicked it had done enough to confuse the mapping systems. The results would be catastrophic. Once inside the Mirage corridor, the jets would lose radar sync. Their targeting overlays would flicker, return vectors would collapse. If they weren't flying with full manual backups, they would be blind before reaching the target. And no one else knew. Not because they weren't capable, but because they hadn't been there when the system was built. Rachel had. She looked down at the SatLink device still in her hand. The message remained unchanged. Glass echo anomaly detected. She could stop it. Right now. If she walked into that room and explained what she knew, she could reroute the mission and save the squadron from flying into a trap. But she couldn't. Not under protocol. Her clearance had been locked with the demotion 5 years ago. Any mention of glass echo outside a verified chain would trigger a containment review. The last person who had broken that rule had lost their commission in 24 hours. Rachel stood on the concrete path outside the door. Unmoving. Inside. Raffi continued the briefing, unaware that the corridor he was recommending would blind every jet under his lead. Her eyes tracked upward toward the radar tower again. The dish swept once more and paused again, fainter this time. She took a slow breath and turned away from the building. There was nothing she could do without triggering a breach review. She walked the path behind the launch control units, passing the crates marked for nightfall deployment. 2 loadmasters glanced at her, then looked away. She moved past the main fuel line and behind the auxiliary antenna trailers, where the signal bleed was strongest. Years ago, during the second field test of Glass Echo, she had proposed a warning trigger, a ping system to detect unauthorized signal mimicry. It had been overruled. Too costly, too noisy. No one thought the system would ever be weaponized. Now it had been. Rachel stepped out of the shadow of the tower and returned to the far corner of the airfield, her hands loose at her sides, the SatLink still glowing faintly. She reached the observation deck near the outbuilding and leaned against the rail. From here, she could see the full arc of the tarmac, jets being fueled, pilots walking toward the ops tent, Thomas among them, eyes on his flight notes. He didn't know either. The signal was still pulsing, and she was still silent. Because she had to be. Because the rules that had once protected the mission now muzzled the only person who knew it was falling apart. The mission briefing room at Greystone Air Station was a rectangular vault of polished glass and steel. Banks of recessed lighting cast a cold gleam across the floor, and every surface reflected just enough to blur the edges of those seated inside. The projection screen at the front displayed a high-resolution topographical map of the target valley, updated in real time from orbital feeds. Along the left side, the vector overlay blinked at 3-second intervals, projecting approach patterns, threat windows, and extraction routes. None of them were correct. Rachel stood behind the tinted observation panel near the rear corridor, her arms crossed. Her name had once been etched on the placard beside the central podium. Now, her name didn't appear at all. Not visibly. Not officially. General Rains stood at the head of the room, posture upright, voice calm and firm as he gestured toward the valley approach. As of 0600, all satellite imagery confirms expected target placement. Operation Burnside will proceed with the 2-phase vector, led by Captain Raffi on primary insertion. Team Bravo will maintain overwatch posture from the East Ridge. Extraction protocols are to follow a staggered lift, depending on threat response. Around him, the room was filled with quiet motion. Pilots adjusted their wrist displays, analysts took notes, and tech staff keyed updates into secure tablets. The energy was focused, orderly, rehearsed. No one noticed the small pause in the terrain's sweep across the lower map quadrant. But Rachel did. It was a compression seam, not visual, pattern-based. A ripple where the elevation readouts glitched for less than a second, then stabilized. To any analyst, it would look like a rendering error. To Rachel, it was the same phantom she had tracked on the radar 2 hours ago. The echo corridor was deepening. If the flight followed the current path, they'd disappear from their own targeting systems within the final 5-minute window. At the front of the room, General Rain tapped his stylus to shift the overlay. Captain Raffi has been briefed on all insertion parameters. His readiness scores are well above the cutoff. This substitution strengthens our command posture for what may be a high-resistance profile. Captain Raffi, seated in the second row, didn't speak. He nodded once, jaw tight. He hadn't asked to replace Rachel, but he hadn't declined either. A low voice rose from one of the analysts seated behind the projection table. "Sir, there's a signature mismatch on the delta vector. Elevation stream isn't syncing cleanly with threat contour data." Rain didn't look up from his display. "Continue with the current loadout. Our topographical filter sometimes lags during packet compression. It'll stabilize in real time." Another analyst frowned. "Except the sync delay isn't topographical, sir. It's signal-derived." Before Rain could respond, the comms officer stepped into the room. He looked younger than the rest, and his shoulders were stiff with tension. "Apologies for the interruption. General, there's a live secure connection inbound on priority channel." Rain's tone turned sharp. "From where?" "Direct from the National Security Advisor's office." That silenced the room. Rain blinked. "Did you verify the encryption?" "Yes, sir. It's gold tier. They're requesting visual relay to this room immediately." Rain stepped back, the pointer lowering in his hand. "Patch it through." The projection screen flickered, then shifted. The valley map vanished, replaced by the seal of the National Security Council. It cleared to show a clean-lined conference room. The man who appeared at the center wore a dark suit and no expression. The National Security Advisor had a calm voice that carried more weight than raised volume ever could. "General Rain, I'm issuing a direct operational override, effective immediately. Your current flight roster is invalid. Reinsert Rachel onto the primary team. She flies." Gasps moved through the room like a slow shiver. Several pilots turned their heads, eyes widening. Even Captain Raffi looked stunned. Rain squared his shoulders. "Sir, I've made personnel decisions based on readiness and alignment. Major Rachel was deemed non-essential for this iteration." "She was never a major." The advisor cut in. "Her reassignment was done under classified terms. 5 years ago, she relinquished active rank by directive to preserve the secrecy of Protocol Glass Echo. She led its original implementation. You are now facing a derivative signature of that protocol in your insertion path. There is no one else qualified to lead your team. Not on this base. Not in your command chain." The room fell completely silent. The advisor didn't blink. "Her code name is Silent Ribbon. She built the failsafe you're now flying into. If you proceed without her, you lose targeting, you lose the squad, and you risk compromising every signal relay we have west of the ridge. I'm not asking for your agreement. I'm issuing final directive authority." Rain's grip tightened around the edge of the podium. Behind him, one of the analysts had stopped breathing. The projector screen darkened for a moment, then displayed the full mission schematic again, this time with a red flag across the eastern corridor. Rachel stepped into the room. She wore her flight gear, gloves clipped at the waist. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't offer comment or gloat. She walked down the side of the room, boots quiet on the polished floor, and took her place beside the console. General Rain turned to face her. She nodded once, professional and measured. "Sir, I'm prepared to resume mission responsibilities." Rain hesitated. He didn't speak right away. The National Security Advisor's voice returned. "Let her brief the real plan." Rain stepped aside. Rachel placed her SAT-link on the console and tapped in an access code. The display shifted again. This time, the map darkened to reveal the signal distortion layer, an echo corridor only she had ever seen laid bare. Pilots stared. Analysts leaned forward. Captain Thomas, in the back row, sat a little straighter. And in the quiet that followed, every person in the room realized they were no longer looking at a sidelined officer. They were looking at the architect of the protocol they were about to survive. Rachel's fingers moved across the console with quiet efficiency. Her gloves remained clipped to her belt. Her posture, upright and measured, hadn't changed since she stepped into the room, but the energy had. The projection screen dimmed to black, then redrew itself with a different overlay, one the room had never seen before. The flight path shimmered briefly. Then the corridor reconfigured. What had been presented as safe ingress, two flanking vectors along the ridge, now appeared highlighted in red, pulsing slowly with a caution indicator. Beneath them, a different corridor emerged. Narrow, winding, hidden in the topographic folds like a current beneath ice. It followed no standard routing, no procedural overlay. Rachel didn't look away from the display as she spoke. What you've been reviewing for the last 2 days is based on false telemetry, not from equipment error, but from a synthetic rebroadcast. The signal is a mirror. It matches the imprint of a legacy encryption shell, one originally designed to mimic environmental distortion. A pilot near the back leaned forward. Glass echo. Rachel gave a slight nod. The variant you're seeing is primitive, but dangerous. It was never meant to be used offensively. Someone took a fragment of the original code and turned it into a corridor trap. If you follow the current vectors, you'll lose return signal before insertion. Your nav overlays will ghost, and you'll cross the fail point before ground command knows anything is wrong. She paused, allowing the weight of that to settle. Captain Thomas shifted in his seat, jaw tight. General Rain remained standing near the central table, but his arms were now folded, his expression unreadable. Rachel tapped a new sequence into the console. The screen refreshed, showing a low-frequency map layered with green contour lines. A new path unfolded along the valley floor, narrow enough that standard radar would register it as unviable. "This corridor is real," she said. "It's the only insertion vector that avoids full signal interference. It's not on the maps because it was built into the overlay's shadow system. I coded it during the original simulations as a failsafe." Captain Rafi glanced at his tactical pad, then back at the screen. "Why wasn't this path ever published?" Rachel's voice remained steady. "Because the protocol was classified above command access. Even at the time of development, only 2 operational architects knew the full grid. I was one of them." Near the side wall, the comms officer approached General Rain and handed him a secure tablet. The device was sealed in a black frame with the National Security Council's emblem glowing at the center. Rain took it without a word and turned slightly away, thumbing through the decrypted pages. On screen, Rachel expanded the false corridor projection. The mirage effect shimmered outward like heat over pavement. The real threat isn't interception, it's confusion. The signature mimics natural topography closely enough that standard systems won't flag it. But once inside, you're blind. Comms will scramble. Target overlays will collapse. You'll be flying off timing alone. Someone at the front of the room muttered a curse under his breath. Another shifted in her seat, visibly uneasy now. The projection didn't just show danger, it showed certainty. Rain kept reading. Rachel continued. "This key," she said, tapping in a final override, "is the only active failsafe for the distorted corridor. It was written into the original shell at level 9 clearance. It's not documented in any surviving protocol logs." The screen blinked once more. A sharp sound followed an authentication ping that rang louder than expected in the still room. The red corridor faded. Only the shadow path remained. That was when General Rain looked up. His expression had changed. Gone was the tight composure. His face had gone pale. The hand holding the tablet was rigid, the knuckles white. He stared at Rachel as if seeing her for the first time. She waited. Rain stepped forward, holding the tablet now like it might burn through his hand. This file includes classified documentation of Glass Echo's original deployment, including field simulations at Echo Range. This includes reference to one test casualty, Lieutenant David Rain, my son. Rachel's voice was low. I remember. Rain's jaw tensed. You were the mission lead. It says you requested a non-disclosure demotion after the operation. You voluntarily erased your name from the formal command archive. You did that to protect the protocol. Rachel's hands were still at her sides. She didn't blink. I did what was necessary. The room had gone completely silent. Rain looked back at the tablet. You never said a word. You took every demerit, every blocked recommendation, every review downgrade, and you never said a word. It wouldn't have changed anything. Rachel replied. The protocol had to stay buried. It still does. There was no triumph in her voice, no challenge, just precision, just fact. The weight of it settled like a quiet compression across the room. Officers glanced between one another. A few looked away. Captain Thomas stood slowly. He didn't say anything. But the way he stood shoulders square, eyes forward, was answer enough. Even Captain Raffi nodded once, the motion short but certain. Rachel turned back to the screen. This is not a reassignment for recognition. I don't need my rank restored. I don't need command acknowledgement. I need to lead this mission because I am the only person in this room who knows how to get your people home. Rain's mouth opened, then closed again. It was Mira who broke the silence from the side of the room. Then we follow her lead. Rachel looked at the display. She entered one final line of code. The path lit green. Outside, the valley waited, and for the first time in 5 years, so did her name. The hangar doors opened with a long mechanical groan, revealing the morning haze rolling off the tarmac. Engines hummed in a low, disciplined rhythm, and ground crews moved with silent urgency, double-checking lines, refueling pods, and clearance beacons. Rachel walked toward the Falcon, V9 helmet under one arm, override key in the other. The flight line had changed. Faces no longer avoided her. Crew chiefs paused and watched as she approached. No salutes, just recognition. She stopped at the base of the ladder, glanced once across the airfield, and let her eyes rest for a moment on the far control tower. From this angle, she could see the edge of the briefing room window. Then she turned, climbed into the cockpit, and lowered herself into the seat with practiced ease. The harness buckled across her shoulders. Her hands moved through the pre-flight checklist in smooth, exact motions. Switches flipped. Diagnostics blinked green. The override key slid into its port and sop, and the console came to life with a faint, familiar tone. Not military standard, something older. Something hers. Falcon leader, confirm pre-check, came the voice from ground control. Rachel tapped her comms. Falcon leader green. Engine cycle in 10 seconds. The canopy sealed shut with a hiss. The world narrowed to metal and glass. She was inside the system again, not because someone permitted it, but because she had never truly left. To her left, Captain Thomas's jet rolled into position. His voice was calm, low. You've got lead. Rachel smiled slightly, unseen behind her visor. Stay close on phase break. Watch for thermal drift after the first drop. We'll reroute once we hit the low shelf. Copy that. The jets taxied in formation, one by one. The squadron aligned on the launch strip. Noses pointed toward the ridgeline. The valley beyond was invisible from here, hidden by mist and topography. But the route was clear in Rachel's mind. She had built it layer by layer years ago. Now, it was more memory than map. Falcon flight, cleared for departure. Throttle forward, engines roared. The aircraft surged ahead, metal lifting into sky, and within seconds the ground dropped away beneath her. The first turn came fast, banking east across the upper shelf. The squadron formed up behind her, tight and responsive. Rachel's voice came across the channel, cool and unshaken. Maintain bearing for 90 seconds, then follow alternate drop vectors. You'll receive codes en route. Watch for ghost flicker at marker 2. Wind buffeted the cockpit. The clouds thickened as they climbed into upper cover. On her display, The terrain grid shimmered normal noise for now, but the shimmer deepened. Ghost markers began to blink. Behind her, Thomas's voice cut in. Visual sync's getting soft. You seeing this? Copy. That's the shell. Stay with me. She keyed in the first sequence. The override packet transmitted in bursts, low-band and encrypted. Each pulse realigned the squadron's navigation system to her path. One by one, her team began to shift minor course corrections that took them off the projected corridor and into the shadow arc. From command, nothing would look wrong. On the standard radar, they would still appear within expected bounds. But the protocol's real path had never been drawn on that map. General Rain watched from the tactical console as Falcon Leader's aircraft veered slightly from the anticipated heading. His brow furrowed, but the signal fidelity didn't drop. In fact, it improved. The command radar stabilized. Return integrity climbed above 94.0%. The rest of the squadron followed. No one spoke in the command room. In the air, Rachel dropped elevation fast, ducking below the primary cloud bank. The terrain narrowed, folding inward. Her display filtered out false reflections as she keyed the second sequence. The enemy's projection zone was just ahead, built from a fragment of glass echo. The signal cast an illusion of open valley, but it was a wall of confusion. If they'd followed the default vector, they would have flown into blackout. Weapon systems would have misaligned. Extraction wouldn't have been possible, then. Now beneath it, they flew clean. Falcon lead to squadron. Prep for strike posture. Weapon lock in 20 seconds. Target markers appeared on her screen. Real ones. Unfiltered. Exposed beneath the shell. A tight array of mobile platforms, communication nodes, and a signal relay embedded into the slope. It had been hidden under projection, relying on false security. It never accounted for someone flying under the shell itself. Rachel's voice stayed steady. Acquire lock. Her weapon systems hummed into alignment. Release on my mark. 4 seconds passed. Mark. The squadron executed in perfect sequence. Missiles streaked forward, low and flat, striking hard and silent. No wild maneuvers, no radio noise, just precision. The kind that left no room for misfire. On radar, it looked like nothing. On the ground, it was surgical destruction. Targets neutralized, Thomas confirmed. No secondary response. Rachel's eyes swept the display. Scan for relay decay, then prep for extraction vector. In the command center, the projection confirmed strike impact. Signal distortion vanished. Data streams normalized. Comms restored. No injuries, no losses. Rain stared at the display. He hadn't given the order. Rachel guided the squadron back into formation. The mist parted as they climbed again, banking wide over the high ridge. Below them, the corridor shimmered once more, just faint enough to be missed, just dangerous enough to matter. As they broke into open sky, her comms lit with one final transmission. Tactical control acknowledged mission success. She didn't respond. Her call sign was already transmitting. Silent ribbon, clear, ascending. The runway lights had switched to amber by the time Rachel made her final descent. The sun had dropped behind the western hangars, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Her Falcon V9 touched down with barely a whisper, wheels catching smooth on the concrete, thrusters winding down as the nose leveled. She guided the aircraft to the final marker and brought it to a stop. Her hands remained steady on the controls for a long second. Then she exhaled. The canopy opened with a hydraulic hiss, letting in the dry twilight air. Below, the ground crew had assembled in silence. No orders had been given. No directive passed through the channel. But they stood there anyway, spaced along the path from her aircraft to the operations building. Not in a formation, not with salutes, but still, present, respectful. One of them, an older mechanic with a smudge of grease still on his collar, nodded as she climbed down. Rachel didn't speak. She removed her helmet, tucked it under her arm, and walked between them. Every face she passed turned slightly, not to stare, not to question, just to watch, as if bearing witness now mattered in a way it hadn't before. Inside, the debrief was already underway. Tactical officers reviewed impact signatures. Signal analysts confirmed clean data extraction. Mission parameters had not only been met, they had been exceeded. No casualties, no deviations. Every phase executed with flawless precision. Rachel sat at the far end of the room, her flight suit still zipped, her gloves folded neatly beside her on the desk. She said little. She was not the center of the discussion, but no one forgot she had been the reason it all worked. Across the table, General Rain sat with a sealed document folder in front of him. The seal on it bore the insignia of the National Security Council. He had not opened it during the mission, nor during the post-strike analysis. But now he did. He slid the contents out in silence. Declassification papers, operational files, confirmation of her original rank and role, records of her voluntary demotion, her field leadership during the Echo Range incident, the embedded command key that had saved the squadron today. He looked at her, eyes heavier than they'd been that morning. "I owe you more than one apology," he said finally. Rachel didn't move. "You don't owe me anything." Rain looked down at the page again. "I didn't know what you had given up. Not until I read this." She folded her gloves slowly, placing them inside the satchel at her feet. It wasn't about the rank. It was about keeping the protocol protected. That was always the point. He hesitated. "It cost you years. It protected the corridor." There was no bitterness in her voice, no triumph, just a clean, flat line of certainty that left no room for argument. Rain lowered the folder and closed it without further comment. He stood, then offered her a single, deliberate gesture. Not a salute, just a small, precise nod, a quiet surrender of pride. She returned it with the same measure. Outside, the sky had darkened. The heat of the day had lifted, replaced by a dry, windless quiet. Rachel stepped into it without delay, walking alone across the flight line as hangar lights clicked on one by one. Captain Thomas met her near the edge of the platform. His helmet was tucked under one arm. He didn't speak right away, but he matched her pace. "They'll remember it," he said, not as a question. Rachel gave a short nod. "That's enough." They walked together past the parked aircraft. The Falcon V9 still stood near the edge of the ramp, shadowed now in low light, its surface no longer gleaming but dulled by dusk. It had done its part. So had she. They passed the lockers in silence. She stopped at her door, and Thomas paused a step behind. "You still going to leave your name tag the same?" he asked. Rachel looked down. The badge clipped to her belt was worn at the edges. The lettering was standard. Rachel. No rank listed. No call sign. She didn't answer. She opened the locker, placed her satchel inside, and reached for the folded item at the back. The photograph remained, untouched. 5 people, 3 faces blacked out, 1 smile intact, her own figure there in a different uniform. She closed the door gently and turned back toward the corridor. Her quarters were unchanged. Plain cot, small desk, narrow window, with a view of the northeast perimeter. A sealed folder sat on the bed, her reinstatement papers. New rank, new orders, all now cleared for open status. The National Security Council had confirmed her name was no longer classified. She didn't open it. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, hands resting on her knees, then leaned forward and placed the folder into the bottom drawer. The protocol had always been more important than the name attached to it. On the terminal across the room, the final mission upload completed. A single code phrase appeared on the screen, blinking once before vanishing. Silent ribbon. Nothing more. Rachel stood, removed her name badge, and placed it on the desk. Then she turned out the light. She had flown her corridor. She had never needed to explain it. And now, no one else ever would. Some missions are flown without fanfare. Some names are never spoken until the moment they are needed most. Rachel never fought for recognition. She didn't argue when her role was erased or when her silence was mistaken for weakness. But when the moment came, when lives and clarity depended on it, she led with precision, grace, and the kind of authority that doesn't come from rank, It comes from truth. This was not a story of triumph. It was a story of resolve, of choosing duty over ego, of being right long before anyone could admit it. If Rachel's journey moved you, if her quiet strength reminds you of someone who walks the hard path without applause, we invite you to reflect, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or follow for more stories that honor the ones often overlooked, but never outmatched. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never had to raise itself.